This is exactly the sort of stage of the Parliament now, like 12, 16, 18 months ago or so, where MPs have got to make a decision. They've got to tell their associations, they've got to tell their constituency parties whether they're going to stand or not again. And you're seeing, particularly on the Conservative side, but not just exclusively on the Conservative side, just MPs of all intakes to saying that they've had enough. I mean, you don't have to go back that far, James, to see MPs, staying 20, 30, 40 years in the Commons.
No.
I mean, look, Ken Clarke.
Well, Edward Lee was on his feet then, just when we...
That's true. Edward Lee's been there for a long time, but he's unusual. He's unusual now. Yeah, Corbyn's been there a long time. Harman, but she's stepping down. It's unusual, getting those sort of Ken Clarke type figures who, he was there from 1970 to 2019. I think the sort of speed of politics has accelerated so much. The sort of half-life of politicians has sort of reduced and reduced and reduced. Maybe because of the intensity of the job, it's become a less appealing job in a lot of ways.
Yes, and I mean, she was very outspoken in her conversation with you.
And she was very young with Emily. Yeah, she was very, very young when she was elected as well, I suppose. So, she's obviously thinking, well, there's a whole different life ahead of her.
I'm struck by, we'll have this conversation another time, actually, but what she says about the way Westminster works, because it is a weird place.
Very weird.
Some people get seduced by it and think that they become masters of the universe. It's a bit like Hogwarts. And
Hogwarts gone wrong.
Yes, and yet others, like Mary Black, possibly because she was so young when she arrived there, sort of see through the pomp and pageantry and possibly see something rather dark at the heart of it all. But I don't know. I like it when people have clearly caught PMQs for one of the first times and they text their responses into the programme because it's always raucous and childish. But when you're hearing it for perhaps the first time, it is striking how many people get in touch every Wednesday to say, is it like this every week? They're just like a bunch of children. Yeah. It's like someone stuck a microphone in my child's kindergarten. And this from, actually unsigned, hilarious, James. The Deputy PM gets asked a question he doesn't answer, then complains that the person asking the question didn't listen to his answer, which he didn't answer. By the way, did you mention Chris Bryant and last week's Blinder? I did, yes, but it didn't come up. So she went in on housing, which obviously Labour are calculating is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as the election looms ever closer.
Yeah, and the coalition for whom that political message appeals is vast in the sense that, yes, there are renters, which are perhaps more natural Labour territory, but increasingly as well, anyone with a mortgage are, looking at what's going on with their bills each and every month or every time they remortgage, whatever, quarterly or every couple of years, and they're thinking, my word, what has happened there? And of course, it is when that happens to the pocket, that people suddenly tune into politics, and perhaps they haven't been tuned in particularly closely before, and they think, what is the result of this? But just to go back to and where's this come from? But to go back to answer what that person was saying in a way, look, if it ever really were a genuine attempt to hold the executive and the Prime Minister to account, it was a long time ago.
Was it, would you say?
Probably not. No. Maybe. Look, it's always been about theatre. It's always been. But then again, we should say there are times, and even in our very recent history, when you can when there is a matter of great import and the Prime Minister can be pinned down. Yes. So, for example, the Boris Johnson Partygate affair. Ultimately, it wasn't what he said to the public which brought him down or which has led to his being expelled from the Commons, effectively.
Well, he ran away.
He ran away, but he would have been.
Would be expelled,
indeed. It was what he said to the Commons. So there are usually at Prime Minister's questions. So
and that was the pincer. That was when Starmer said that. Leave that there.
Yeah, exactly. And so there are moments when it really does matter. But 95% of the time, somewhere north of 95% of the time, it's mainly theatre. And in a way, that is why Sunak not turning up repeatedly is a mistake. Because if the sort of parliamentary function of it, which is important but is often unfulfilled, is sort of second order, it doesn't really happen, then the main order of priority is to provide a little bit of theatre, get your message out there, as you say, James, and say to the troops, don't worry, I'm in charge, we're going through a sticky patch, but we'll come out of it the other side. Not turning up is just on repeatedly is not a good idea.
Yeah, and also it's indefensible, by which I mean allies can't really...
Not really. No.
Cover for him. They'll say, no. Well, you don't understand. He's got important stuff. But they'd be like, he could have gone. He should have been there.
He could have. The NHS thing, he could have moved. Yeah. Easily. Next week's a bit difficult.
Of course. Yeah. There was a time when we could have demanded NATO move.
Yes. We can't even get our own Secretary General these days. So
things ain't what they used to be, are they? So a bit of a score draw, really, that, or a no score draw. I think Dowden got rinsed by Mari Black, but I don't think Rayner landed any particularly stinging punches.
No, and
it's groundwork, isn't
and
it?
Dowden didn't have a bad line himself talking about the sort of tensions between Starmer and Rayner.
Is that true? Are they very?
I think that I think there have been differences over
Yes,
the time
of course.
when they've been there. I don't think that they are. Look, I think that there is inevitably with any professional relationship there are ups and downs, and it's true to say that at one point he tried to move her, and then that didn't work very well when he was at very, very low ebb. I think they recognise that they both have qualities and characteristics that maybe the other doesn't, and in some senses they're quite complementary. But yeah, look, I think that should they get into government, one of the very interesting subtexts of that government will be the relationship between Rayner and Starmer.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that there is some paranoia at the top of the Labour Party. There always is with any leadership in any sort of leader's office. And
You mean
and
with
so on.
regard to a coup attempt?
Well, yeah, or just around the people who are around, and they're thinking. Obviously now, I mean, Starmer's in this interesting position now, and Dowden did refer to this idea of a reshuffle, which there are lots of speculation about Starmer doing a reshuffle. Not least because actually the government have abolished and reformed and formed again so many different departments that actually the shadows often don't really correspond to the ministerial jobs that they're supposed to be shadowing.
Yes.
They've got a DFID secretary, an international development secretary at the moment, for example, and there is no international development department. So there is a suggestion that Starmer will do one last reshuffle before the election to try and get his team in place. But that obviously creates all sorts of internal dynamic tensions within the Labour front bench, because they're all thinking, where am I going to get moved to, whatever. But Starmer is in this unusual period where, they think, daring to hope that they're heading for government, and they're putting the sort of final team in place to go into that general election, which is obviously going to be so vital. And of course, that creates all sorts of tension and difficulty within the front bench.
And I mean, reshuffle on the other front bench as well, surely, before a general.
Oh yes, I'm sure there will be.
Plenty
Yeah,
of talk
possibly.
of that
I
as
suspect.
well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suspect in the autumn. And in some senses, Starmer will probably wait for that, so he can just see then exactly what departments he's got to play with and who's going to go up against whom. But yes, there will be. And again, it'll be one of those things that we are a great deal of attention paid to it in Westminster. But I mean, in terms of making any fundamental difference to any outcome, is in terms of the election will be absolutely negligible. I mean, Sunak knows. I mean, this is one of the sort of tensions for Sunak now, which is Sunak's whole shtick is that he's a guy who can deliver. Now, leaving aside whether or not that's true and whether he's proving that, he also knows that basically we are now heading into the time where the capacity for this government to deliver anything other than crisis management is very, very limited, because there is, 12, well, it's much less than 12 months even of legislative time if you take all of the time that the House of Commons is going to sit between now and the election. So the chance, there's not going to be any great NHS reform, there's not going to be any great schools reform, there's not going to be any of that. It's all sort of crisis management and political optics. And then the question is, how good is Sunak at political optics? And the worry among a lot of Conservative MPs is he's not very...
Seems to get worse every week. I mean, that's quite the fall from perceived grace, isn't it?
He seems irritated at the moment that the government... And
it doesn't look like he wants to be there, Lewis.
Well,
as of about 2 weeks ago, I think he's... I mean, it may come back, and I may be misreading it, but he has the air, particularly as you mentioned earlier when he's being questioned, he has an air of a man who's going, oh, why did I do this?
I think he's irritated. He believes the government should be getting more credit than it should. But I mean...
For what?
Well, in terms of compared to when he came in, that the situation is much improved in his view. Now, obviously, in a sense, that is like a very low bar, right? But also, secondly, even if let's take it, just for the sake of argument, say he's right that things are much improved. Governments don't get credit for that.
No.
You can't say, and to some extent, I think that might reflect, again, when we're talking about how quick political careers are now. He only came in himself in 2015.
Yeah.
When Mary Black did and when Oliver Dowden did, and he's Prime Minister.
It's incredible.
He hasn't got the kind of hard yards of kind of seeing things go up and down and oscillating.
Yeah, it's a philosophical
and just being like, well, listen.
perspective.
And so if he genuinely is, if the reports and whispers are right that he is irritated by the government getting a lot of credit, I mean, it sounds a bit patronising. I don't mean it that way, but that would advert to a certain level of political immaturity in a way. Like,
naivety.
Governments don't get credit for stuff like that, for just making things a bit better and a bit more stable. It's 13 to 14 years in. The economy is in a terrible state. People are suffering. You ain't going to get much gratitude.
What do you want? A biscuit?